Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Points of Light Radio and the journey we're taking together. And my guest, jumping right in here on Points of Light Radio for this segment, is Toby Hanson. Now, before going any further with him, I want to draw your attention to a previous segment of Points of Light Radio where I interviewed a gentleman named Mike Dominiak. And he was here shedding some light on the Patriarch's militant. And while he was doing that, he spoke on one of the key requirements of getting into the Patriarch's militant was that you had to be a royal purple, you had to have the royal purple degree in the encampment. Now, I'd only recently heard about the encampment, and it really piqued my interest. Now, I want to stop here and say once again, as I often do here on Points of Light Radio, if you haven't saw the segment I did on the Patriarch's militant, or even on the Odd Fellows themselves, right, the Muscovites and others, I encourage you to go back and take a look at those, because as I always say, it kind of will line up very well with what you'll be seeing and hearing here today on Points of Light Radio. Right? But Mr. Hansen is here to continue where Mr. Dominiak left off by shedding some light on the encampment. Now, I'll give you some quick insight here before going to the interview. The encampment is an appendant body or higher branch of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. Membership is open to all third degree Odd Fellows members in good standing. And there are 3 degrees to the encampment. First is Patriarchal degree, second is the Golden Rule degree, and the third is the Royal Purple degree. And I'll allow Mr. Hanson to shed some light on those. Now, the branch aims to further the work of Odd Fellowship and impart the principles of faith, hope, and charity. A little bit more on my guest here tonight. Mr. Hanson is the past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Washington, the past Grand Patriarch of the Grand Encampment of Washington, the past Sovereign Grand Musician of the Sovereign Grand Lodge, and current Grand Treasurer of the Grand Encampment of Washington. He is also a podcaster, and his podcast is called the 3 Links Oddcast, devoted to Odd Fellowship. And I love interviewing podcasters. So this segment will be even, it'll be even that much more special to me, right? And how about we let him explain a little further, shall we? And I can't wait actually to continue this journey into Odd Fellowship. So let's go talk to Mr. Hanson. But before I leave you and head for that, I want to ask you once again, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Can you just trim your lamp and follow me? Mr. Hanson, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and you are in the encampment, as I understand it.
That is correct.
Okay, well, why don't you tell us, first of all, a little bit about yourself?
All right. I'm a member of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. My home lodge is Ballard Alkine, number 170 in Seattle, Washington. And I joined in the summer of 2000. So I've got almost 23 years in at this point.
Whoa.
During that time, I've had the opportunity to serve in a variety of different roles. In 2018 and 19, I served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Washington. And before that, in 2007 and 8, I was Grand Patriarch of the Grand Encampment of Washington. In addition to that, I'm currently the Grand Treasurer for the Grand Encampment of Washington. And I've done almost 20 years as Grand Musician of the Grand Lodge. And then I got to serve 2019 through 21 as the Sovereign Grand Musician of the Sovereign Grand Lodge.
Sovereign musician. Now, what exactly is that?
It's the same thing that a regular lodge musician does. You're just doing it at the highest level. So the Sovereign Grand Lodge is the organization that has oversight over all of the Grand Lodges in the Independent Order of Odd Fellows. So all the North American Grand Lodges, the Grand Lodges in Europe, the Grand Lodges in Asia, they're all overseen by the Sovereign Grand Lodge. And I was the musician for that group.
Okay, what instrument though? Like what?
Well, depending on what's available, I play both piano and accordion. So in some instances where a lodge building has a nice piano, I'll play piano. Other times when the instrument is not in such good repair, I'll play my accordion. It just depends on what's available at the time.
So play them for what though? Meetings, ceremonies?
In the case of Sovereign Grand Musician, I was playing for the annual communication of the Sovereign Grand Lodge, which happens every year in August. So every day we have one of our opening odes that we sing, and then there's a short devotional reading, and then I would play and sing something following the devotional in keeping with that day's theme.
Okay, now let's talk about this encampment.
Yes.
Exactly is the encampment for? What do they do?
I like to call the encampment the think tank of Odd Fellowship.
Okay.
So in the subordinate lodge, you have the business of being a lodge to tend to. And that can include things like taking care of the building, doing your various social activities, the charitable works that lodge do, and of course, the most important thing, which is member support. We are a mutual benefit society at heart, so we help each other out as members. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of time to talk about the history, the traditions, the symbolism, sort of the more esoteric side of Odd Fellowship. That's what the encampment does. The encampment is the place where you can go and sit down and say, what is the symbolism of the degree of friendship? And how can we enact that symbolism, learn from it, put it into work in our daily lives?
Okay. And do you maybe make decisions for the subordinate lodges as well at that point, or?
No, the encampment is a separate independent branch above the subordinate lodge. So to be eligible to join an encampment, you have to be a third-degree Odd Fellow in good standing, and your application has to be signed and sealed by the secretary of your Odd Fellows Lodge. So assuming you've met that qualification, you can apply to join the encampment. It's basically the next level up in Odd Fellowship. So you have to prove yourself as an operative Odd Fellow working in the subordinate lodge before you get the opportunity.
So the guy that never shows up for lodge meetings, forget about it. He's not getting in the encampment.
It's extremely unlikely that he would make it as a patriarch in the encampment.
So it's almost like, for instance, some of the other outfits have appendant bodies where you can really deepen your experience within that organization. This sounds like it's maybe, shall we say, a little deeper than
it is. It is definitely deeper, and the structure of the encampment and the way that it's set up is intended to facilitate that kind of deep instructional opportunity. For example, encampments generally do not have anything that they're in charge of. They don't have to take care of a building. they can do various social and charitable things, but generally the encampment is going to be about social activities and about bringing people together to learn more of the deeper symbolic and esoteric side of Odd Fellowship, since the regular lodges are usually busy with just everyday fraternal business.
Yeah. So you're not there to, in other words, have fun with the encampment. You're not there to, it's a serious, it's a place for serious second thought, I guess you can say.
It is. And not to say that you can't have fun. One of the great encampment traditions is getting together for your encampment meeting and then playing cards afterward, organizing social events outside of the encampment meetings. But the basic idea is the encampment is there to act as a place where you can deepen your knowledge of Odd Fellowship, which is why it's called an encampment, because it's supposed to be an encampment of patriarchs. And the patriarchs are supposed to be the wise, older, more experienced members in Odd Fellowship who bring new people in and educate them in the ways of Odd Fellowship, which is why the jurisdictional leader of the Grand Encampment is called the Grand Patriarch, because he's supposed to be the one with the greatest amount of knowledge and wisdom.
Okay. Now let's talk about the degrees. I understand there are 3-4 degrees to it?
There are 3 degrees in the encampment.
Okay.
So the first degree is called the patriarchal degree. And that is based on the patriarchs of the Old Testament of the Bible, who were believed to be these wise shepherds who very carefully and safely guided their flock. So someone knocking on the door of their encampment room and experiencing that degree would get to interact with patriarchal Odd Fellowship and learn why it is important for us to have that level where the older, more experienced, more wise members are gathered to help impart their knowledge. The next degree up after that is called the Golden Rule degree. And as you can imagine from the name, it basically teaches the Golden Rule. One of the interesting things about the Golden Rule degree is it is one of the few places in Odd Fellowship where the figures that we venerate, in this case, the biblical patriarchs, are presented as being human and fallible. And so you get to see that even though you may attain the wisdom of a patriarch, you still have to be very careful about how you employ that wisdom, because you still retain your human fallibility. And then the top degree of the encampment is the Royal Purple degree. And that is a degree that is actually a heck of a lot of fun to participate in and put on. Of all the degrees of Odd Fellowship, it's my personal favorite because there are a lot of trials and tribulations that the candidate gets to experience as they learn the perils of the rough road. Now, the lesson of the Royal Purple degree is all about trust and toleration, and how, as patriarchs, we have to learn the lesson of tolerating those who are different from us, and how we can incorporate that into our experience as Odd Fellows. But we also do it in a very, very fun way.
Okay, now, what would you say is the big difference between, shall we say, getting your degrees in the subordinate lodge versus getting them in the encampment? Are they more, shall we say, ceremonial, more reverent? What would you say?
Well, in the subordinate lodge, those degrees teach very important operative lessons. So in the subordinate lodge, there are 4 degrees. There's the initiatory degree, which is where you learn all of the working material of a lodge, how to vote, how to use signs, passwords, grips, all of that. It's the functional introduction to Odd Fellowship. Now, on top of that, you have the degrees of friendship, love, and truth. Okay. And each of those teaches a lesson about why it's important to have those qualities and how to put them into action. When you get to the encampment, we have the luxury in the encampment of being a lot more esoteric. Because we are not doing regular everyday lodge business, we can sit around and spend an hour or two discussing some of the points of Odd Fellowship. You know, why was it that Thomas Wilde thought this was an important part of this degree? Or what does this symbol teach us? And where do we see it in life? And how do we interact with it? So the encampment degrees tend to be more dramatic. They're acted out more. There's much less lecture in the encampment degrees than in the subordinate lodge degrees. And it's also sort of a more nuanced experience. In the subordinate lodge degrees, you're basically lectured at and taught why these qualities are important and how you need to conduct yourself as an odd fellow to express them. In the encampment degrees, you really get to have more of an experience where, as the candidate, for example, in the Golden Rule degree, there's a section where the candidate goes around and interacts with groups of people who are very different from the candidate. And so the candidate gets the experience of saying, wait, these people are all very different from me. I should react badly to that. But then at the end of the degree, you get the experience of one of the patriarchs coming and saying, you know what? I have made a mistake, and I want you to learn from that mistake and not repeat it. And so it's a lot more thoughtful and interactive with the candidates for the encampment degrees. I think they are beautiful and teach very sublime lessons.
Okay. Now, where are your meetings? Like when and where are your meetings, and how long are they?
The average encampment meeting is around an hour. Encampments tend to meet once a month.
Okay.
Subordinate lodges meet twice a month, and that's because they're usually doing a lot of business. So they need to make sure they can keep the lights on and do everything, and take care of the sort of member business, finding out who's sick or in distress. So lodges meet twice a month, but encampments only meet once a month. And they're about an hour to maybe an hour and a half. The degrees tend to be conferred on special degree days because they take a lot of preparation. Regular subordinate lodge degrees can easily be done in about 30 to 40 minutes at a regular lodge meeting. Whereas the encampment degrees, they're a lot more intricate. So we tend to do encampment degrees in my jurisdiction twice a year as needed. So once in the spring, once in the fall.
Okay.
Because we're not doing a whole lot of functional business in the encampments, we don't have much to report during finance reports and things like that, because we just hang on to our money. You know, as we collect dues, we pay it to the Grand Encampment that pays it to Sovereign Grand Lodge. So there aren't a lot of expenditures. So it really gives us the time to dig in and interact with the history and traditions of Odd Fellowship. For example, my home encampment, which is Buckley number 40, we have a regular series of lectures and discussions where members will take a certain topic, image, or part of Odd Fellows history, and they'll present a 10 to 15 minute talk on it, and then we discuss it. And so that gives our members a way to interact with that knowledge and come up with, hopefully, a better perspective on Odd Fellowship as a result.
Okay, now what's the dress code and what are the dues?
The dues vary from one encampment to the next. In my jurisdiction here in Washington, they're anywhere from $20 to $40 a year. So it's not expensive. The primary color for the encampment is purple. So we wear purple fezzes with gold writing and tassels. When you're a Grand Patriarch, you get a purple fez with white writing and tassels. And I have one of those, which I'm entitled to wear in the encampment room. Some encampments are a little bit more formal. Since mine has a lot of blue collar working guys in it, they just come after work, so we don't have a really specific dress code. At the Grand Encampment level, we definitely have a dress code. For the business session of the Grand Encampment, it's business suit, and then the installation is always tuxedo and white jackets for the past Grand Patriarchs. One of the traditions of the encampment is when you become a past Grand Patriarch, you are given a white jacket by all of the other past Grand Patriarchs by way of welcoming you into that community.
Okay. Now, I remember there was a jurisdiction when you talk about degrees that were doing for the primary lodges, they were doing all-day degree rallies. Do they still do those in Odd Fellowship?
There are some places that will do that. Myself, having been a degree captain of a degree lodge previously, I had the experience of taking my lodge degrees one at a time every 2 months. And so doing that process, I actually had to learn the unwritten work, memorize it, and then come back and prove myself before the lodge. For those jurisdictions that like to do degree days, which we sometimes do that here in Washington, I don't think the candidates get as deep of an understanding because they don't have to go away and memorize all the symbols of the degree of friendship and then repeat it back to the Noble Grand in front of all of their peers in the lodge. Now, I had that experience and I loved it. I thought it made the whole thing much more valuable. But a lot of jurisdictions will choose the expedient route and they will do initiation in the morning, break for lunch, and then do the 3 degrees after lunch. So everybody is a 3rd degree odd fellow by the time they leave at 4 o'clock. Now, they do get the full experience, but they don't have to actually memorize the work and really commit it. They're not learning the signs, the grips, the passwords. They're not really learning those things. And since our lodges operate primarily in the initiatory degree, even if they learn all of the material of the 3rd degree, the only time they actually put it into practice is if they visit a Grand Lodge session, which, although it opens and closes in the Grand Lodge degree, Grand Lodge works in the 3rd degree. So that's the only time that we actually use the information that we learn about the 3rd degree.
Okay. Now, is the encampment growing?
In some places, yes.
Okay.
What has happened in the last couple of years since the pandemic, you may have seen some of this with other fraternal groups. There's been a lot of interest, particularly amongst younger professionals who are looking for somewhere that they can belong that is meaningful. Odd Fellowship has benefited from that. In my jurisdiction of Washington, we had a lot of people joining during the pandemic, and even afterward, that has continued. So our jurisdiction got an increase of members both for the subordinate lodge level and the encampment level. That's not necessarily true everywhere. Some jurisdictions are still declining, some are gaining. There have been some new encampments that have been chartered lately. I just helped some brothers in Pocatello, Idaho. They revived Wilde Encampment number 2.
Oh, that's good.
They did that last fall, and it got so much attention that the next lodge down the freeway from them, which is in Ogden, Utah, heard about it and said, hey, we want an encampment here in northern Utah. So members from Ogden are driving up to Pocatello a couple hours, attending the encampment meetings, and learning how to run an encampment so they can go back and charter a new encampment for themselves in Ogden, Utah. So there are definitely places where new encampments are being chartered. I know plans are underway for one in Kentucky. New encampment was just chartered in New Jersey. The patriarchal side of Odd Fellowship is starting to grow as there are new members coming into our subordinate lodges and saying, hey, this is great, I want to learn about it, and then finding out that we have a built-in structure for doing that learning.
Yeah, well, there should be, I think you'll agree with me, a exponential effect when you pick up membership at your subordinate lodges. But are you double odd?
I am not. We don't have any Grand United lodges in this area. And now that I'm a past Grand Master, I get tasked with doing a lot of various things around the jurisdiction, like helping out struggling lodges. We just last fall helped our lodge in Wenatchee, Washington, rebound after the pandemic, and they are just doing a great job. So I'm traveling around the state a lot and doing a lot of sort of hands-on helping out lodges here and there. So that kind of keeps me from doing anything else fraternal besides just, my work at the jurisdictional level for the Grand Lodge.
Well, okay, tell us about, I believe you have a podcast called Oddcast.
That's correct. I'm one of the hosts of the Three Links Oddcast, along with Brother Ainsley Heilich and Brother Mike Dominiak. And we have been doing the podcast now for almost 3 years. It'll be 3 years this summer. And in that time, we're getting close to 20,000 total downloads.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So anyone out there who's listening, who's curious about the ins and outs of Odd Fellowship and some of the great stuff, and, we also look at some of the challenging stuff as well, look it up on your favorite podcatcher, the Three Links Oddcast.
That's awesome. And it's basically solely dedicated to Odd Fellowship.
That's correct.
That's great. Yeah. So I've heard that the further you go in fraternalism, you learn more about yourself. Now, have you found that to be so in Odd Fellowship? And what did you learn?
Absolutely. I still remember the night of my initiation very clearly, even though it was almost 25 years ago at this point. And there's anyone who's done a fraternal initiation will understand exactly what I mean when if it's done right, it makes an impression.
Mm-hmm.
And that idea that is central to Odd Fellowship, which is we have to be there to help our brothers in need, that was completely impressed upon me. And there have been a couple of times in my life when someone has called upon me for help, and I've been like, oh, I don't feel like doing that right now. But then I remember that obligation that I say every time at the end of Lodge, and I go, hey, if I am truly an Odd Fellow, I have to conduct myself as an Odd Fellow, which means even though I don't feel like getting in the car and driving out to help another brother in distress, I'm going to do it. And I have done it. And I realize in those moments why the teachings of those degrees are so important. Why is it that we are presented in the degree of friendship this compelling example of one person risking their life to help another? Well, it's to remind me that as an Odd Fellow, I signed up for that. I said, I'm taking this oath, and it's a sacred oath, and it's binding, and so I'm going to do that. When somebody calls me and says, hey, I need your help, brother, I go and help, even if I don't really feel like doing it. There's those times when it's after work and it's late and you're tired and you're like, oh, I'm so happy to just sit in the easy chair and watch TV. And then you get that call and it's like, oh. Now, I've also been on the receiving end of that. A couple of years ago, I went to visit the grand sessions that were held in Wyoming. And Wyoming is a jurisdiction that is really doing a lot of great things to invest in its lodges, refurbish the halls. They have some beautiful old Odd Fellows halls in Wyoming. They're doing great work there. So I went to visit their grand sessions. Well, on the way, I happened to run over the remains of an animal on the freeway.
Oh.
And so I pulled into town and I had tread flapping off one of my tires. And I was like, oh, great. So I had to get a couple of used tires. So get on my phone, text the only odd fellow I know in the area and said, "Hey, brother, I'm in a little bit of trouble. I'm here in town for the sessions, but I've never been here. I don't know anybody. I need somewhere to go that I can get a used tire so I can make it out of town." And he says, "Oh, my brother has a tire shop in town. Just, I'll call him, be down there at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. He'll get you fixed up." And so I have literally experienced the degrees of odd fellowship, both as the one providing assistance and the one getting assistance.
See, that's amazing. And that's really, I've said this before, in any lodge system, no matter what fraternal stripe you belong to. Yeah, I've tried to explain this to different people. These fraternities, you do a lot of good work and do a lot of charitable works, but the charity starts in-house.
Yes.
Brethren taking care of brethren. And that's really what it's about.
And that's the core principle of odd fellowship. If you look at the roots of odd fellowship and where it comes from in the English guild system of the Middle Ages, the odd fellows were the ones who weren't part of skilled trades. They were not the ones who were butchers. They were not the ones who were bakers. They had a trade association or a guild. They were the odd and assorted fellows of various crafts. And they said, the only way we can get the kind of security that those guilds have is to ignore our differences and come together and help each other out. And that lesson has endured for hundreds of years.
See, and that's amazing. Well, Mr. Hansen, I appreciate your time today, and all the best to you and the encampment.
Thank you very much. Encampment is my favorite part of Odd Fellowship because I do love digging into the esoterica of all of it. So thank you very much. And it's been great being a guest here on your podcast.
Okay, have yourself a great day. Toby Hansen, brothers and sisters. Just shedding some light on the Odd Fellows Encampment. Here are some points that I felt like I personally gleaned from this conversation. First of all, as I've said before in previous segments, with both Odd Fellowship and other organizations, there's something for everyone. And that's true here in Odd Fellowship. For Odd Fellows who want a little bit of fun, there's the Muscovites or the Odd Riders. For those who like a little bit more regimentation, deeper involvement, there's the Patriarch's Militant, which we've covered before. And then there's this place of, shall we say, sober extra thought called the encampment that we've covered here tonight. And this sounds like a lot of fun for those who really want to, further their journey, shall we say, in Odd Fellowship. And as I've said before, it was great to have this reinforced tonight. Odd Fellowship is alive. But even further than that, the appendant bodies are growing exponentially with the growth of the subordinate lodges. And I've often talked about this. Some people are just content to join a primary or subordinate lodge, as he's called them tonight, and do a little bit of chair or committee work there, but just stay there. And then there's men like Mr. Hansen, or even his friend Mr. Dominiak, who I interviewed in a previous segment, who prefer to take that journey a little further, right? And we need members from both those, shall we say, both those sides. The person who just stays in the primary lodge, but we also need people who are willing to go a little further, right? Because that really, one helps out the other. I really believe that. And that to me is true fellowship as well, right? And more than that, I love interviewing podcasters. I really do. And we will be having Mr. Hansen back. I don't know when. I've already asked him. He's already said he will come back here. So we're going to have him here again on another segment of Points of Light Radio, and I'll be looking forward to that. But unfortunately, that's all I really have time for at this point, brothers and sisters. But before I go, as usual, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. In fact, like I keep saying, I want to see some more comments and input on when you look at this on YouTube. You can also follow my podcast on Facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. And my Spotify channel, you can see the link to that, as well as my Points of Light Radio story. I will also draw your attention to the fact that I've left some links to the Oddcast, as well as the Odd Fellowship Encampment page. I want you to have a look at that for yourself. But, brothers and sisters, I'm sorry to part with you, but until we meet again, just step into the light.